Hello, welcome to A Piece of Cake, Utah. My name is Katherine O'Donnell. I'm your host, and today I'm going to teach you a little bit about carving cakes. Now, I know it's fun to have a shaped cake and everything, so I'm going to teach you some of the basics, and hopefully you'll be able to springboard off of that and do some amazing cakes yourself. We're going to do a little pumpkin cake today, so I've made my sketch, and that's always the best first thing to start off with, is whatever you want to do. You either want to make a sketch or download the picture off the internet or something like that, but just get a picture, not just in your head, but also on paper of what you want to do. And then the next thing that I highly recommend is to get some kind of a pan that is more or less the shape you're going for. Now, I know some shapes won't be readily accessible, but if you can find one that's even a pan that's only that shape, then do that instead of carving it. But if you have to carve it, then I would get, so if I was going to do a pumpkin, I'd probably do something like this round type cake or cake pan, or if I didn't have that, something like this Wonder Mold cake pan would work really good. I could turn it upside down and that would be, my pumpkin and everything. If you want it to be a little more 3D-ish, so it would stand up, some of these cake pans work okay, but it would actually be better to carve it that way instead of just having it half of it or something, because when you turn something like this upside down and you have this part as the bottom and then you put a top on top of it, the edges just tend to get really heavy and it might fall apart and crack on you, especially if you don't have a really good dense recipe to work with. So you want to make sure that you use something that's already that shape. But if you don't have any of that, if you can't go out and buy a whole bunch of pans that look like the shape and everything, and say you just have a couple of these little small pans, I'll show you what you can do. So first off, I'm going to take my pans here and I'm going to arrange them so that they more or less look like the general shape that I want to get. So I want a pumpkin shape, so I want it to be kind of round. So I've stacked up my cake pans here, and with a little bit of carving and trimming, I could have a nice round cake. Now it's going to be really nice and firm, because even though I do have these edges here, this is not what the cake is sitting on. It's sitting on a separate piece that's going to be down here, and so that's not going to fall apart on me, and yeah, it's just a little bit more stable when you carve a cake this way. So now that I have my general idea, I've got my picture, I've got my cake pans kind of set up, then I'm going to go ahead and bake my cake. And of course you'll want to bake just a couple of extra layers just in case something happens. So we'll set these aside and I'll get out my cake. Now the only thing that I did get a pan for that I don't recommend trying is when you have a small thing that you want to carve. I highly recommend getting something that is more or less that shape already. This is a tiny little mini stand-up bear pan, and we're going to decorate him to look like a little cat coming out the top of our pumpkin. So this works out a lot better than trying to carve a huge piece of cake into this tiny little thing. There's just too many things that could go wrong, too many tiny little pieces, and it sticks together better when it's already baked into that shape. So now that I've done that, I've got my cake pieces here, and we'll unwrap these and set them up just like my cake pans. Now I've mentioned before you want to have a really good recipe. I highly recommend a densed up cake mix recipe. That's going to be the best one for you. I've got a couple of those recipes on my website that you can look at. If you go to my website, you can see some recipes there. There's some scratch mix ones, but the densed up box mix one is the one that I highly recommend for carving cakes. Or you could use a pound cake. A pound cake recipe works really, really good. And some people don't like those because they feel like they're too dry or things like that. But as I've mentioned in a previous show, when you bake your cake, you want to wrap them up in this nice plastic wrap, and that will help you to have a very moist but dense cake. Okay, we're going to flip. Oh, this one's going to be standing up. I forgot. You want to make sure you remember the order that you're doing this in and how your cake pans looked. These cake pans that I used had a little bit of it kind of went out a little bit on the edges there. So I'm going to use that to my advantage and keep that so that I can get my little curve kind of in the middle. But I'm just going to unwrap all of these so I can get ready to put them together. And it does take a little bit to get them unwrapped, but we'll get them all unwrapped and set out. For the filling, to stick all these guys together, I'm going to use just a chocolate buttercream icing. I do not recommend using anything else except for icing, because as you cut and carve into this cake, you might run into that filling there, and it's going to gush out, and it's going to make your cake less stable, and it's just going to ruin everything. So you want to make sure that you do not use a normal filling like pudding or fruit or something like that. You want to just use your plain icing. And hey, who's going to complain about more icing in their cake? I know some people probably would, but okay, wipe off my hands a little bit here. Okay, so we've got our bags of icing or filling ready to go. So we're just going to squirt on, and you don't have to level these off or anything like that. We're just going to make them level with our icing, and that way you save a little bit of time. And they already baked up pretty good. I like how they baked up. So we're going to smooth this out and probably take off a little bit of this filling. We don't want to have too much filling in it, because I am one of those people that believe that there could be too much icing on a cake. And we just don't want to have too much gushing out from the sides and the edges and things like that. Okay, so that's pretty good there. We're going to take our first little tier here and set that on top. Kind of get down and make sure it's in the right position. There we go. Wipe off my hands again. It's still just so moist. I made these tiers a couple days ago, so it's so moist still that it's getting all over the place, which is fine. And I know I'm going to be carving the edges here a little bit, so I'm not going to put my icing all the way out. And that way I run into less mess while I'm carving. Pipe that on there. And I'm a big believer in piping your icing on. I do not like to grab a whole bunch of icing from the bowl and put it onto my cake. You just run into too many problems with that, getting too many crumbs everywhere. So I just really like to pipe it on, and then I smooth it off what I don't need. Okay, our next tier, and if you remember the shape of our pan, it kind of went out a little bit, so I'm going to flip this one upside down so I can make sure to have the right look to it. Wipe off my hands again here. I just normally wipe off my hands because it makes it harder to grab your icing bag when you've got greasy, messy stuff all over your hands. We're going to pipe on some more icing. And again, I'm not going all the way out to the edge because my other cake is smaller, the one that's going to go on top there. And I just don't want to run into too much icing while I'm carving. We're just gonna smooth that out a little bit. But hey, pumpkins are supposed to be bumpy and lumpy and not smooth and perfect. So that's another great reason why you don't have to be too particular about this. Okay, so our last little cake piece is gonna go right here on the top. And then I'm just gonna push down, kind of push everything together, get a whole bunch of cake all over my fingertips. It's going to work out just fine. Wipe them off, and then we're going to get to carving. So now that we've put this all together, I'm going to get everything ready to carve it with, and we'll see in a minute.